Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing.
Hello and welcome to the Influence to Death podcast. I'm your co-host, Hannah Wright.
And I'm your co-host, Victoria LaFont. And today we are here with our buddy, Amanda Jones. So Amanda is one of our nearest and dearest. And the reason, Amanda, that I'm interested in having you here, one, is, of course, we're going to talk about detoxification and all of its crevices, both positive and negative and in between, but also just because out of all of the people that I know in my life, you are one of the best thinkers. Like, you have things that come out of your mouth when we talk on the phone, and we have some marathon phone conversations, and I'm just like this on the other side. You never see me. Now you can. I'm like, I would never have even thought about it like that. So, I mean, Amanda, I don't even know if you have a bio. I was just going to kind of like give a little background of you, or you can.
I don't have a strong bio. I mean, we have an eerily similar bio, Victoria, other than your time as a teacher's aide at UWS. It's kind of like, it's odd how much we could take away some of the details and names and times and places and like line it up and it'd be the same bio. And that we both went through the Nutritional Therapy Association and then went into being an instructor there and did curriculum development and have been teaching for a long time, and then went to UWS to get our master's. So yeah, and Hannah, I guess it's the same thing. And then a lot of our really odd, squirrely backgrounds that gave us a lot of the real nitty-gritty education on nutrition, like all the odd experimentation that we've done in different groups that we've been part of and wild ideas that we've pursued. So I don't need to have a formal bio. I'm just kind of like part of the gang, I guess you'd say.
You totally are. Yeah, I mean, we even have like social intertwining in our backgrounds from like our early 20s because of friends that I had in Northern California. And I remember telling you about it and you were like, oh yeah, I biked across Europe with those people. I was like, what the fuck? Like, how is that even possible? And with music, because you're an incredible musician and singer.
That's how I got into nutrition. Was I was losing my voice because I had silent reflux, acid reflux, and I was not able to sing on stage. And so that's kind of how I stumbled into this whole other tract. I was like Googling about acid reflux and found a video from, what's that lady's name at the NTA, Caroline Behringer,
Oh my God, yeah.
talking about vocal health and acid reflux and
because she's a singer.
Yeah, and those were the days where it was just like all about supplementing with hydrochloric acid, no matter what was wrong with you, kind of thing. And it worked for me. I did it. I took some hydrochloric acid, and it really helped kind of kickstart my digestion after a bad car wreck had given me a hiatal hernia and all sorts of GI problems. So I was a believer and started down the path of nutrition. I was like 13 years ago now.
Wow.
I would love to have an episode about that because reflux and GERD is so common. And I think in functional medicine space, like hydrochloric acid is kind of like the go-to. And it wasn't until I had Dr. Harlach talking about, well, let's actually look at that. If people actually have too little stomach acid, it's actually more common to have too much. I don't know. It just kind of blew my mind. And so that would be a cool episode to do.
Yeah, I've been kind of trying to like unpack all the different curriculum that I've ever heard or learned or ingested about stomach acid over the last year because I've been doing a bunch of curriculum rewriting, and I was so stuck on zinc for a while because I think that was the other thing aside from HCl was zinc if you are low in stomach acid. And it was one of those things where I'd look at the research on taking zinc and it actually acted like a buffer in the stomach and reduced pH and reduced inflammation. And like it was an acute like lowering of acid, but then it's also the cofactor for a carbonic anhydrase, which is the enzyme in the parietal cells that makes the hydrochloric acid. So that was the link. Anyway, yeah, there's so much to kind of parse around functional medicine approaches to upper GI dysfunction and hypochlorhydria. And unfortunately, very, very few people are actually finding out what is really, we don't do like the Heidelberg tests, there's not a whole lot of like actual data on or even studies on hypochlorhydria.
Mm-hmm.
Amanda, wait, let me ask you this because I think either I have this wrong or you have it wrong. But when you take zinc, is it in an acute setting, it lowers pH or it
I'm
raises
sorry,
pH?
it raises pH.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. It's
Alkaline.
Yeah,
yeah.
because we used to teach it as like zinc is a cofactor, like you said, for periodal function. Like I don't even know that biochemical pathway that you just said. I couldn't name
Carbi
it.
carbonic anhydrase is the enzyme in parietal cells.
And it's a
Like,
cofactor for that function,
enzyme.
but in an acute intake, it will raise pH, which is the opposite of what you want in the stomach. So it's this sort of like
Exactly.
zinc paradox.
Exactly.
But
We're
that's kind
coining
of
that.
interesting to like think about people taking zinc under the impression that it's making their stomach more acidic in that kind of theory of having hypochlorhydria. And you're like, oh, this is helping because it's making it more acidic. But actually, chemically, that's not what's happening. It's making it more alkaline and it may be making your symptoms better because it's making more alkaline.
Yeah.
So like, wait a minute.
Also,
Yes.
the not even to touch on, I think maybe this is just important from a practical sense. If you are listening, you're like, oh, I'm going to take some zinc. Take it with food. Like one of the biggest
Yes.
clinical lessons that I ever learned was giving people that aqueous zinc and they would take it on an empty stomach and then you would lose a client for life because it makes you sick as a dog. Most people it does.
That's happened to me. You just projectile vomit. At least for me, it's like an immediate, instantaneous. Like if you had ingested something, it's almost like Ipecac. You're just like, I'm gonna take it and just like immediately response. Yeah. And you're like, what is happening? It happened so fast.
I think that was one of the things we used to have a narrative around that, like so many of the things that I used to think I knew turned out to just be stories and like narratives that were easy to understand and repeat and talk about, but we didn't really pause to be like, okay, wait, so how do we know this? And do we really know this? How would we know that if it was true? And that zinc was zinc absorption was one. Do you guys remember being taught that like if you're low in zinc, then you have a hard time absorbing zinc?
Yes.
Which is the
Yes.
opposite of the case. If you're low in zinc, your intestines will like
You have an affinity
increase.
for it.
Yeah, exactly. You'll suck it up so much more than if you are, have sufficient levels of zinc. There's so many of those things where you just have to go back and like prod
Honey,
prod
that's
the
what this
information.
entire podcast is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And that's very on theme for detox because that definitely happens in detox messaging.
Oh my gosh.
absolutely. Yeah.
More
That's
so than
so
I think.
so we're gonna have a couple housekeeping points and then jump into talking about detox in the world today, which is actually, as we're looking at the research literature, detox in most peer reviewed research is talking about detoxification from opioid addiction, alcohol, like substance abuse. So, anyway, we're going to get into that. But first, there's a couple things that we need to cover. One, we have gotten a lot more listeners lately, which is awesome. Welcome. It's great to have you here. And I just want to clarify what this podcast is about. We've gotten a few comments lately, particularly on some of our more controversial topics, where people are like, sort of like, I can tell they're like riled up, like, you need to have this other influencer on to counter the points made by the influencer that you had on. And, like, I can tell it's like it's doing its job, which is kind of making us hopefully, question and feel a little that uneasy feeling of like, is this true? Versus like, I need to defend my stance. And that is actually what the podcast is for. We're not here to promote one topic or the other. We have biases. That's why we tell you our biases. We 100% have stances and opinions, sometimes that are really strong, which is why we have a whole section of the podcast where we tell you that up front so that versus, I don't know, does anybody else do that? I think there are critical thinking based podcasts and writers and like that, but you're likely so used to hearing opinions coming from people and you don't know that they have a bias, that you're responding from that like foundation versus people who are like, hey, we do have biases, but we don't have a dog in the fight either way. We just want you to know. And then we're going to try and look at research to both like support and push against what we think. Because like Amanda was just saying, we've all been taught a lot of bullcrap. So we're trying to figure out like what works the best. So I just want to clarify that this is not a podcast to crap on carnivore diet or crap on seed oils, or we're just exploring, and we're trying to do it in a way that is as balanced as possible. And if you feel riled up, that's kind of the deal. I feel riled up too sometimes. I feel riled up about detox, which is the topic of the podcast today. Hannah, do you want to say anything about that?
No, I think that's spot on. I mean, we're not here, like you said, trying to prove a point or like switch your line of thinking to say, no, this is wrong, this is right. We're just exploring what is and trying to be open-minded and continuously learn and ask questions and encourage others to do the same and stay curious. So if it's hitting a soft spot for you and riling you up, I hope that can encourage you to like kind of look at like why it's making you feel that way without trying to be your armchair therapist. That's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just like, you take things really personally, especially on social media and things like that. And like, come on, like, let's just take it easy.
There's actually a guy the man who lived and owned the land that I lived on in Hawaii. He used to say people would rather change their religion than their diet. And the deeper I get into this, I'm like, he was correct. He was absolutely
Or like,
correct.
oh, they're one and the same.
Yeah, totally. Good point, Amanda. So yeah, this is for questioning. And the reason we tell you our biases is so that it is very apparent that, hey, this is coming from two humans and we're not perfect. We're just doing our best. So that's the deal with this pod. Second point, this is more really bookkeepy. We are going to start with having content that's exclusive to our paid subscribers this month in February. So for starting at $5, you can become a subscriber. It's really great. We love this. I would love to make this my full-time job. Hannah, I don't know. Hannah, you're about to go back to school and do all kinds of cool stuff. Maybe support us getting our PhDs. Yes. Please. That's how you can support us in getting our PhDs and getting better at this. But we're going to release one episode a month right now for anyone who is a paid subscriber. And this month, the podcast is going to be our review of Brian Johnson's Netflix documentary. I think it's called How Not to Die. So he's a tech entrepreneur that has taken extreme steps to prolong his lifespan. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. And yeah, we really appreciate your support. So please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. We're on Substack under Influence to Death and Instagram at Influence to Death. Oh, and you can always email us, influencetodeath@gmail.com. We have gotten some really good emails lately, and topic suggestions like urine therapy is going to come up in the next few months. So thanks for that.
I just want to add that for the one episode for paid subscribers, we'll still have our regular 2 episodes. We will never gatekeep anything behind a paywall. So our regular episodes will always feature what we feel like is most important and useful, like the takeaways that could potentially, alter your health journey or your decisions or things like that. And the paid episode will be more for fun, weird stuff, things that we're getting, our subscribers are asking us to cover, stuff like that. You're in therapy, Brian Johnson, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you have made that as part of our model. It's great. Okay. Oh, I also wanted to say this. We got our first 3-star review on Apple Podcasts. So here's the deal. Review us. I don't have to get 5 stars. I mean, that makes me feel good. But if you rate us and leave a review, I want to hear what everybody has to say. And I'm totally stoked on getting low stars. Let's hear it.
I'm honestly surprised that it took this long to get a low star.
I was excited. I was like, yes, we're reaching people.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else before we dive into detox?
I don't think so. Let's.
Talk about a topic. Um, Hannah, do you want to talk about the history, or do you want me to talk about the history, or Amanda, do you? How do you?
No, I'm not
I
prepared to talk about the history. Will one of you guys talk about the history?
Yeah. I mean, I can speak to it. It's detox is old as God.
Mhm.
People have been engaging in detoxification strategies for, I mean, recorded thousands of years. I would guess probably like the earliest account is either in the Essene Gospels. Do you guys remember the Essene Gospels of Peace? Have you ever
No.
heard of that?
Is that a biblical thing or what is that?
Yes. So supposedly they are Gospels of the Bible that were removed. And it's the way that Jesus
Wow.
and the disciples lived. And in those Gospels, there are accounts of them doing enemas and eating raw fruits and vegetables and avoiding meat, like a very like a how do you say it, like plain
Ascetic.
ascetic diet. Yeah, like plain simple. And there's even still like at the health food store, sometimes there's that Essene bread.
Oh, that's what that is.
That's what that is. So yeah, there's
I,
accounts of detoxification there. In Ayurveda, so Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Eastern Indian medicine, there are many, many forms of ways to cleanse the body. Panchakarma is kind of like the most popular name for cleansing in that tradition. And I just happened to live in a town in Northern California where there was an Ayurvedic college. And I remember a lot people would be doing Panchakarma cleanses by eating medicinal ghees and, you know, doing specific strategies for their like constitutional type, like pitta, vata, or kapha. And it's just a very specific type of cleansing. People eat, is it khichdi with it's like mung beans and rice. Um, Very different than the detoxification techniques that we see today that are more like juices and plants, you know, raw foods and like that. In Ayurvedic medicine, it's like everything's cooked, lots of grains, lots of ghee, you know. So it's just interesting to kind of like start to see like, oh,
Hmm.
this method is thousands of years old, and it looked a very different way than it looks today. In traditional Chinese medicine, there are forms of detox with herbs and dietary changes. Sweat lodges from a spiritual and physical perspective. So it's out there, right? Like we have this as humans. I don't necessarily say in our DNA, but maybe, but it's been like in our history and in our psyche for thousands and thousands of years, this idea of detox.
Do you think it was mostly in that history, like more of a spiritual and religious context, detox? I mean, that's kind of, I mean, maybe that's just what you read about, but that seems to be what's aligned. It's not more, less about like the toxin, like you're toxic, and more about, well, I guess it's kind of the same thing, like to be pure, to be, I don't know. What do y'all think?
I think that's, you're like putting your finger on it. I think it's so funny with Victoria. You're like, detox is as old as God, or the whole idea that like diet and religion can be the same thing for people. That's so true. And I think a thread that connects a lot of these different cultural approaches and histories is this idea of asceticism, where you're trying to so one of the early traditions was Manichaeism, which is a religion that was really, really popular around the time of like in the early Christ era. So like, 2000 years ago or so, where it was a kind of a competing religion with Christianity. And their whole thing was, the question was like, if God is all good and all powerful, then why is there evil in the world? And the answer to that was, well, there's two gods, according to this religion, Manichaeism. There's two gods. There's the good God, and he governs the world of spirit, and then there is the devil, and he is the second God who is evil, and he governs the world of the body, which is where you find rot and carnal urges and sexuality and hunger and appetite and like the physical world. And that those two gods were pitted against each other. And the way that you move toward the good God of spirituality is through asceticism and, you know, doing these kind of austere, harsh measures to your body, which is really kind of like where fasting came from, and the idea of these like monks in the desert who were living on one dry,
Raisin.
chickpea a month kind of thing, whatever it was.
We had an episode
One
about
drop
that.
of oil on type, that asceticism that they were, and I think then like in that tradition certainly carried through with Christianity and all its different forms, and like looking back into Catholic history where that beating of the corporal body and the punishment of the corporal punishment in a way. I know that now means it's punishment to the physical body to move closer to God and your spiritual body. Um, that was, there's such crazy traditions around this where like wealthy people would pay for these
Right.
nuns and monks to do their kind of corporal penance for them because they're out trying to build their empire and they can't be, flagellating themselves and starving themselves and purifying their physical self. So they would actually pay other people to do their penance for them. And then as Christianity changed to after
Just,
the Reformation.
yeah,
The
the
Reformation was,
Lutherans.
yes, there's another word I'm looking for, but the Reformation was like, hey, you guys can't just be paying the nuns and priests to do your purification for you. You've got to do it some yourself. And in a way, you could like trace that into today's diet trends of our need to purify and maintain dominance. Oh, and then there's also this idea that kind of as we became monotheistic and we weren't talking about these two the devil as another god, what kind of came to replace that in Christianity was Eve. Eve represented
Mm.
like the sin of the physical world and the sin of, indulgence of the apple and the pleasure of the physical world. And so that tradition carried on through multiple different branches of Christianity. But yeah, that idea of asceticism, I think, can be seen now that we are more secular. Um, then it's kind of like, wait, is it non-secular that I'm
It's
looking
secular,
for? Secular. Okay.
secular.
That term always seemed backwards to me. But anyway, so now that we're more secular, it's like we take on this um, burden of purification and in our own life in these other ways. But I wonder if it's part of religion um, for other reasons other than just kind of this effort to get close to God. Like how far back does this go? Does it go into more of like an earlier hunter-gatherer kind of evolutionary, like the potential for encountering toxins in plant foods or rotten animal
Mm.
foods or food poisoning. I mean, before we had all these other kinds of toxins, I don't know. I don't know how far back it goes into kind of pre-recorded history.
Yeah. You know what that made me think of? Something that I was so surprised to learn that kind of fits into pop culture is Kellogg's cereal. Y'all know about John Harvey Kellogg, and he developed Kellogg's cereal. He was a Seventh-day Adventist, and so it was an alternative to, I guess, like a breakfast that was like heartier and warm and like, you know, high in calories, you know, as this cold breakfast cereal. And it was to help you become more pure and remove your carnal desire and reduce sexual urges, is to like eat this certain strict diet. And that was really where his head was at. And now Kellogg's cereal is like this huge part of
Cool.
our culture in the United States. It's so bizarre to me.
It's
But
when I said like it's as old as God, I should revise that and say it's old as God as a man. Because when God was a woman, we didn't fuck with this shit. We had warm breakfasts and lots of sex and like breastfeeding and lovely, relaxing. I don't know. I don't want to idealize it, but I think there is something there that is very, very interesting where it's like there is a thread of, I would call it like masculinity or male, where it's like this kind of like removed, cold, separate from the body. Like I think of like a monk, you know? And in today's world, like a nun, that is, that's in my personal experience, that is not my experience of the feminine. Not that we need one and not the other. I think we need both. But my guess is there's this like massive magnification of that way of viewing the body and living life that, yeah, like you're saying, it's like threaded in. I mean, the Puritans came to the United States to avoid persecution in Europe because of their religion. You know, it's like that kind of like thread comes through like in many different ways into our culture today. Seeing the body as something that needs to be tamed and controlled and cleansed versus nurtured. Those are two different things. Although the paradox is, and we're going to get into this, for actual detoxification to happen, and the medical term for detoxification is biotransformation. That is actually what it's called in the medical literature. It is a nutrient dependent process, highly nutrient dependent. So kind of interesting that there might be that dovetail. Wow. Okay. That went in a direction that I did not expect. That was super cool. I think we're the biggest fans of our podcast, or at least I am. I love this. Okay. Should I speak about research, or who else would like to speak about research?
Yeah, go. You can go ahead and start, Vic.
I mean, it's sparse. That's kind of the by and large big takeaway is there is not a lot of primary literature on detoxification protocols. We do have an understanding of the biochemistry of how the body biotransforms toxins, toxicants. We're going to talk about the difference between those two words here in just a minute. Hormones, any input that we put into our body has to transform it into something else to either recycle it or get rid of it. And Amanda, I've heard you talk about this a lot in the conversations just that we've had. And I know you've just written curriculum around this, so jump in. We have knowledge of that biochemistry, but there's not a lot of literature on like strategy. There are some groups that have done studies. We'll put publications. There's this man, Genuous. Do you all remember reading his work?
Yeah, he's the one that has a blood, urine, sweat study that's really fascinating, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. There's a 2023 study I found on supporting phase 2 detoxification, which is a biochemical sequence of events with a whole food supplement. They saw some positive outcomes. Amanda, I stuck a study in here for you where they were looking at olestra, cholesterol, as a way to reduce essentially forever chemicals is the way that would be easiest to say it, you know, for people that are listening. I know that was like a highly interesting topic for you when you were studying this, because people can take, it's a prescription drug, although in the 90s, olestra might sound familiar to you because they used it to create fat-free potato chips in the 90s. And if you remember, on those potato chips, there was a warning. It may cause, did the warning actually say anal leakage or like rectal leakage on the
or did
bag?
it say something like unfortunate? It was like an unfortunate event could happen or something like that.
Basically saying like, if you eat too many of these, you're going to shit your pants. And the reason why is because the compound that they would use to fry those chips is I'm guessing a form of cholesterol, olestra, which is actually the compound that they used in this study to bind PCBs and other forever chemicals so that we can excrete it through our feces. I would actually love to have olestra potato chips now knowing, and I ate a shit ton of them growing up. So maybe I did a little service to myself in the pursuit of being as skinny as possible, which also dovetails into this episode. But there are studies on that as a medical intervention for people who have illness that is resulting, like obvious frank illness resulting from these different chemicals. There are also studies like on the use of chelating agents when people have overt metal toxicity. So there is some out there, mainly around very, very overt illness. But there's not a lot just like for maintenance or optimizing health. There's not a lot of research studies for anything to optimize health or maintain health. But we are going to put some links to the studies that we found in the show notes. And then any other studies that you all want to touch on or speak to.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to note on like with that in mind, I feel like, and I know y'all put this in your notes as well, there seems to be very two like conflicting views on detoxification in the wellness space. And one is like the folks who kind of almost seem to be limited by the science, where they're like, you don't need to support detox. There's no such thing as detox almost. You have a liver and kidneys, and that's all you need. Your body does it. It's all a bunch of woo woo. And then there's the other side that's like, you have to detox. You have to, do these detoxes regularly. Otherwise, you're going to be sick. The toxins build up. You're exposed to all these toxins and they're killing you. And it's kind of extreme. And we're not here to say that we're choosing like one of those sides. That's not what this episode is about, because obviously there's a ton of nuance there. And, like Vic was saying, the small amount of studies that are available are on people who are very ill from a toxic,
Yeah.
whether that be something like mercury or like the forever chemicals, whatever it is making them really sick. And, unfortunately, that's kind of how a lot of research and even conventional medicine approaches work, is that you're not going to do anything about it until you're actually overtly like very ill and it's very noticeable. But there's all of these other cases that can fall in the middle where you just don't feel good. Like parts of your life are being affected. Your health is not optimal, but you can't figure out what it is. And like those people get lost a lot, like overlooked, because they can't get the answers. And so I just want to put that out there, like for people who fall into that, who seek detox protocols or messaging because they really know something is not right with them, but they can't figure out what it is. I feel like that's a big target audience for this. And I don't want to like make you feel like you're being gaslight lit, saying like, well, there's nothing wrong, because a lot of times you'll hear that. I feel like I'm going kind of off on a tangent. I just wanted to say that both situations can be true at the same time.
Yes.
And like, just be aware of that. Like, it's not like a black or white thing. Detoxification, like biotransformation, is a real thing. There are toxins, which are like scientifically called toxicants, that can make you very, very ill, like extremely noticeably ill, or just like on the pathway to getting to that noticeable place where you're not going to feel good for all those years. So that was just short interjection. Sorry.
That's great. That's true.
It's so true. And I think that the part of what drives the kind of clap back towards, alternative influencer-based detox protocols is because so many of them are completely not evidence-based and are just like blaming everything under the sun on, your need to detox. And it's this, since the thread of being interested in detox runs so deep in our psyches and our spiritual lives and our, everything. I mean, historical and present, it's represents such a powerful point for marketing and sales and the sale of products. So I think a lot of that clap back from, chemists and medical professionals is warranted in response to some of the insanity we see in the detox marketplace. But it can feel like it's completely dismissive of where there is real evidence-based, real information on how all these thousands of new environmental pollutants, and I say environmental pollutants, just chemicals that we are getting in our consumer products. Like there's plenty of research on how those affect our mitochondria and disrupt metabolism and hormone signaling and all sorts of stuff. So I agree, Hannah. It's like it's a both and situation, and it can feel really dismissive. But a lot of people aren't getting the real detox, the science of biotransformation and this, nutrient dependent enzyme pathways that are, responsible for helping to keep our body burdens at a tolerable level. They're not getting that. Just doesn't, that kind of in-depth information, of course, just doesn't sell as well on social media. So there's a big divide between the two.
Mhm.
I did want to just clarify around the olestra. Like what's
Okay.
happening there with why it's giving you diarrhea is that it's a indigestible fat. So you
Right.
end up with this really high level of fecal fat, like fat in your poo, and that causes this anal leakage or diarrhea or both. But that fat content is basically acting like a sink where any fat soluble toxins that you're consuming either through the oral route or that the liver has kind of captured and put into the intestine through the bile,
Right.
that it blends with that oil and then gets excreted into the toilet. That was the idea there. So it's kind of acting like a fat-based binder versus like
Yeah.
other types of binders like fibers, charcoal, clays that are also acting like a binder in the intestinal lumen. They're not as necessarily as potent for some of the fat soluble things. Like maybe like clays have a really strong affinity for heavy metals and other minerals.
Right.
So I just wanted to go back and clarify that because in terms of research, I do think there is more like kind of like you're saying, there's fewer clinical trials and more kind of pharmacokinetic studies looking at
Right.
the
Mechanistic.
affinity of different binders, different nutrients for certain types of metals, for instance. But one that is industry funded is like privately funded study by Pectisol on modified citrus pectin. I still feel like it was a very straightforward study, and it was pretty impressive in terms of the increased excretion of lead and cadmium and arsenic and mercury, I believe, in urine
Mm.
after taking modified citrus pectin. So that would be one to add to the list, kind of with that caveat that it is an industry, private label study. But it was the pectosol is really interesting. There's a lot of research like continuing on that because it also seems to have an anti-carcinogenic effect in some types of cancers. But the that whole idea is that it's a fiber binder that is processed using enzymes to make the molecular weight and size so small that it actually can be absorbed through the intestinal barrier and into the bloodstream where it has an affinity for different toxic heavy metals and not so much with other metals like magnesium and zinc and iron, it
Mm.
seems. So then you can, you can take this modified citrus pectin goes into the bloodstream and then can be excreted through the kidneys. So we could pop that study in your list as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that supplement is really cool. It also tastes really good. I
It
guess
does.
it's what
Delicious.
they're adding in there to make it taste good. It's a little pricey, but for the dose that you have to take and the length, but and it's very safe. This is not like medical advice, but as far as I know, it's safe for children as well, right? Do y'all are y'all aware of that?
I was actually
Uh,
looking over here because I used to have some citrus pectin that I took for a while and actually didn't finish because I feel like I had a negative experience with it, but I'm just like one,
oh,
uniquely
interesting.
strange human. Um, and so I stopped, but I had it sitting here for so long. I don't know what. Maybe my husband was like, I'm tired of your thousands of bottles of supplements running around the house.
It has to do, there's something with like, this compound called galectin 3 in the body that I don't really know about this pathway, but it has a lot to do with like tumor cell proliferation or inhibition. And I think it can also bind with sex binding hormone, maybe
That's where I think
there-
I had an issue is with my hormones and taking modified citrus pectin. We're getting a little.
yeah, so
I
we
mean,
won't go there.
it's interesting to me, but I'm like, how would our listeners think about this
To say, just to say that these
inhibition?
things can have like multiple different activities in the body. So you might be really excited about like this one detox, mechanism of action that it has without like pausing to ask, well, what else,
Does it do
what other pathways could it be affecting that we're not even thinking about the outcomes of
right?
those?
Right. That's a really good thing
Good
to point
point.
out because we can overlook stuff like that a lot.
It looks like it inhibits galectin 3. Modified citrus pectin does. This is just a study done in 2021 on citrus pectin inhibiting galectin 3 in people with hypertension, just to clarify.
Do y'all want to
Um,
talk about our bias if we're kind of done with the history as far as we know? I mean, I feel like I'm not really biased in either way. Like, I'm very aware that obviously a lot of people do need extra detoxification support, whether it be because we are constantly exposed to all these things that are things our bodies have to break down and excrete.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and some people, because their diets are poor, because they have genetic, predispositions, whatever it is, they need like extra support, and because their toxic burden is a lot higher. And I also see that side that you mentioned, Amanda, where it's like everything under the sun is blamed on toxins. And it's like that marketing is really fear-based. And it's really, oh, I think some people are really susceptible to that. And it really gets in their head. And they start to become very fearful of all the toxins and everything's toxic, and it feeds into this purity around food and having to have your food a certain way, and which almost becomes a type of disordered like eating and living, really.
Mm-hmm.
I also get a little frustrated with the whole detox culture because it is a very, I mean, similar to a lot of other wellness trends, it's a very it's kind of elitist, I guess. It's like not, it's just like, I don't know. It's extra, I guess, like and the way it's marketed. So that side of it, I really can't stand. I can't stand fear-based marketing. I don't like it when something that's supposed to, you know, cure you or heal you is so expensive and like unattainable for the general population, but yet they see the messaging around it that like they're not going to be healthy without it. That drives me nuts. But I guess all in all, it's nuance. Like there's both sides. I get frustrated with both of those arguments because they have a lot of faults and they kind of overlook things because they want to prove their point and their point only. So that's where I stand. I don't really have personal experience with the detox pros or cons. I did own a juice bar for a while and
Oh
like
my God. Oh, right. You had like a bike powered juice
yeah,
bar,
pedal
right?
powered juice bar. And that was when juicing was starting to get really trendy. Oh, maybe like 10, 15 years ago. Is that right? I'm bad at math, but we didn't have like a juice bar yet in our town. And, in New York and stuff in LA was starting to get really big, like the bottle, the cold press, like bottled juice. And
Yeah.
we had a lot of people that would ask us to if we would do detox packs for them, like make like a whole week of juices. And this was before I started to study nutrition, and I knew a little bit, but I was like, no, like that's a bad idea. I think I did it for one person, and I was just like, look, dude, you need more than this. Like this is not gonna like help you detox or whatever, whatever you're trying to get out of it. Like please see like a doctor and like
Mm-hmm.
get guidance. But
We should
yeah,
get a photo of you all with your bike
I would
trailer
love
juice bar.
to provide that. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember seeing those photos and being like, wow, that's so cool. Amanda, do you want to talk about what your
Bias?
vibes are on detox?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to just summate what my
Yeah.
bias is because I think like all of us I've had so much experience. I mean, I've done the like 11 series of 11 colonics while I was drinking nothing but like fermented vegetable juice and coconut oil to try to clean my guts up from candida and whatever else. And I have excreted things that are like that demanded I go and get my camera to take photos. And I've been in so much of it. I can't really say for sure how much it's benefited me. I was raised by parents who did the master cleanse twice a year for
Yes.
11 days. And
Tell
they
us
would
what that
definitely
is. That's on our
that's
list.
lemon juice, or basically lemonade made with maple syrup and cayenne, and then some psyllium husks. And these, when you're basically having nothing but psyllium husk. You can get these long like ropes that are actually in the form of your intestinal wall that like are you basically have to like you pull them out rather than just like pinch them off. You know what I'm saying? Like they can turn into these really crazy ropes. And the detox world says that is, I forget, there's a term for
Impacted.
it. Yeah, there's like a real a term for these masses that people eliminate, and whether or not they are psyllium husk or real like yeah, compacted matter that's finally getting out. And an enterologist would kind of be like, well, we look in people's guts all the time, and all it takes is like a day of fasting and some, laxatives, and we go in there and it's pretty clean. Like you can actually see the microvilli and villi, and you don't have all this impaction unless you do, and that's how you get a really medical concern like diverticulitis. Anyway, tons of feelings about it, but so I've done a lot of it, seen a lot of it. When I was growing up, there were two women in my community that I was close with who both had breast cancer, and they decided to do the Gerson diet, which is actually kind of there's a lot of detox rituals and techniques that connect to the Gerson diet. I mean, he was huge on juicing, and you had to get this special juicer so that you didn't cut any of the cells. They needed to be like compressed and masticated for the juice to be healing, and doing a lot of liver flushes. And these two women followed this diet to the T to try to detox and cure themselves of their breast cancer, and they both died really brutal, gory, painful deaths. And I was really radicalized in a sense, or just like informed my bias of the need for bridging, alternative approaches with the best of our Western medicine, like diagnostics and treating, what otherwise might be a terminal illness. Just their unwillingness to take any input from the Western world out of this belief that if we could just get pure enough and natural enough, that all of these ailments we would stop suffering, And so that was powerful to watch. But I see clients and have students, and they're coming in with all kinds of different detox rituals, is what I like to call it, because that's how I see it. It's like if you are into castor oil packs over your liver, that one's so huge right now, which goes way back to like the 20s and Edgar Cayce, and nobody really kind of tracks it all the way back to its roots. But the act of putting the castor oil on a piece of flannel and laying it over your liver and putting a hot pack and laying in bed and giving yourself this healing time and the belief that you're healing, I think all of that is really powerful. I mean, we could call it placebo effect, but there's also this other term called psychoneuroendocrine immunology, which is about, how our psychology ripples down into real measurable physiological changes. And that these rituals, or maybe it's putting your feet in a hot Epsom salt bath or a charcoal face mask or coffee enemas, whatever they are, they're definitely having effects on, I think, more than just the physical detoxification pathways. It's giving you this sense of self-care and empowerment in a world where a lot of us feel very disempowered by the fact that these different chemicals are in our environment, and it's hard to avoid them completely. So that sense of empowerment, like I have a way in my own home to manage some of this, and it gives me a belief in my own resilience and well-being and ability to heal. Like that really, really matters. So I just always kind of weigh the balance of like, well, we might not have a whole lot of scientific research evidence to base this practice on, but then we can also just say, is there, there might be some piece of biological plausibility. So maybe something is going on there in terms of biotransformation, supporting biotransformation that we just aren't measuring yet. Or maybe it's more of that psychological impact, as long as it's not posing a high risk for harm,
Right.
and also not super expensive and draining somebody's resources that could be spent on, other needs in their life. And, so if they're draining their time and finances to go to pursue one of these detox rituals and there's no evidence behind it, that's where I would start to worry a little bit more. But yeah, the people are like I have a little bit of bias in the same way that you do, Hannah, in that I get really annoyed with the marketing. I have this picture that sometimes I bring up in class, and it's like this woman who has, the lashes and all the facial injections. She's probably has fillers and the Botox, tox. The hair is dyed and treated in a million ways, I'm sure. The acrylic fingernails and all the like volatile organic compounds that she'll be inhaling during the process of maintaining these fingernails. And so she looks amazing, like a Barbie doll. And she's holding this tea that she's selling that is being sold at an incredible price markup.
Yeah.
It's not organic. And then if you buy it, you get this, which I know organic, like it can still have issues with like heavy metals in the soil and stuff, right? But the tea in the first place is not organic. And then it comes with this mug that is plastic. And so you're supposed to be brewing your detox tea in this plastic mug, and it's just her, and she's like, it's all hot pink everything and plastic everything. And then you can go and buy this like tiny little thing of tea for $80. And that's just like, so that also informs my bias. And I also one time saw somebody literally burn a hole through the bottom of their tongue because they were sold by a MLM essential oil business that they should be doing the straight oregano oil under their tongue for a detox protocol. And they just kept doing it because the salesperson was telling them that the burning was a sign that they were detoxing still.
That's it, right there.
Oh, that makes me so angry. Yes, golly. Oh, that we can't even get into the MLM detox models.
Oh, we can.
The whole other episode.
We've got plenty of time.
Say, Amanda, what you were talking about with the ritual, like having maybe a benefit on its own through what did you call the psychoendocrine pathway?
Psychoneuroendocrine immunology. It's like everything, all the main systems.
So that's actually, I don't know if it's that specific system or pathway that's studied, but they study this with positive emotion. And I'll link some studies in the show notes, basically where they look at inflammatory cytokines and people's emotional states. You're really like your perception of your emotional state. So self-reported. And positive emotions, particularly joy, dramatically reduce inflammatory cytokines and increase anti-inflammatory cytokines. I mean, by a lot. And laughter does it too. So like, you go have coffee with your girlfriends and you're like laughing and you're like, man, I feel so good. Because literally there is a chemical reaction happening inside your body that's ramping, inflammation down, like the bad inflammation that maybe is in excess and you need that balanced out. So that's a real thing. It's like a real thing that happens, which is so cool. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
But do we need a strict protocol, or can we just like go have coffee with our friends and like laugh, Like,
I remember a study, it was the inverse of that, where it was like if you have a fight with your partner, pro-inflammatory cytokines spike for a certain amount of time, and then it takes time for them to come back to, within normal ranges. Right. I think like IL-6 and TNF alpha.
Mm-hmm. Just like loneliness and isolation does it, because we're herd animals, and if we're apart from the pack, then we need to be ready to deal with all kinds of heightened survival measures. And
yeah. You all, I will tell you, I love detox. That is my bias. I mean, of course, I have the same feels that you all have around the marketing and the sales and the hype and the. Do you remember Norwalk juicers used to be like $6,000? And that was like the juicer to get to follow like Gerson or like the Kelly protocol if somebody had cancer, which I'm sure it made good juice, but like, what? But I mean, I still have that like detoxy part in me, like something that's drawn to that. And Amanda, similar to you, oh my God. I mean, I remember like fermenting cabbage and then juicing the cabbage to make like sauerkraut juice and doing enemas with the juiced sauerkraut juice.
Whoa, is that a thing?
No, I'm just a total dumbass who would do, again, I was like, I know I've said this in enough episodes now. People are going to be like, who is this group of friends that you had? we just tried all kinds of shit. Like I would be out in the jungle with my enema bag, you know, like sitting on a log somewhere down, you know, southeast corner of Hawaii, like holding my enema bag above my head, learning how to do enemas. I was just like obsessed with that. But and I this is the thing that I think is important to say that we haven't touched on as much, but we're definitely going to get into it as we look at some of these really well-known detox protocols, is oftentimes these are associated that we say detox or we say cleanse or like that, but I think what a lot of people's aim is to like reduce cellulite, get skinnier, look more like societally
Mhm.
acceptable, like whatever their
Mhm.
idea of beauty is.
Mhm.
That's the aim, and for sure that fueled me for years and years and years, and is still in there. So I mean, I'm just I know humans well enough to know that that probably is still in me.
Yeah.
But God, I tried Dr. Schultz's incurables cleanse, where you take all the pills and the juices and the pectin and the yeah, I can't remember what the name is, but you know, you see these pictures of this like long, ropey, black tar looking poop that comes out of people when they go get colonics and getting colonics. I worked for a colon hydrotherapist in Oregon for a while, like all of the shit. And yeah, I have no idea if it helped or harmed. I spent a lot of money, that's for sure. And then there is this flip side where it's like, yeah, people, okay, some people have like overt illness. I mean, we see that in research studies. Do you remember, or did you ever see the studies where like it was like a teacher who ate a can of tuna every day for like 6 years, and then he started to exhibit like
Mercury
symptoms of
talk.
psychosis, and they thought he like had a mental illness, and then sure as shit, yeah, his mercury levels from the tuna was like, and here's a part too that we haven't really discussed. It's like maybe I could have eaten that tuna or somebody else, and just because genetically how I am or whatever my activities were or whatever my other intake was, I would be able to handle that body burden. But his glass wasn't big enough to handle the amount of mercury that was going in. You know, or we see that like in hairdressers. There's case studies of like
Mhm.
they have like extreme like chronic fatigue and swollen lymph nodes, or you know, they think they're sick and like this, and then they like get out of that environment and they're better. So
Yeah.
there's everything from like wanting to be prettier to overt illness, and then all of the colors, you know, grayscale in between. But yeah, to me it comes down to like, are we hurting people, and are we breaking them? You know, are we affecting their financial status?
Yeah.
It's hard because I think we come to this point in almost every episode. Conventional medicine, I just kind of look at it as like that's not their training, it's not their focus. I wish they weren't as like anti. Like I read an article on the Harvard's, you know, Harvard medical newsletter that's like talking about how detoxes are a scam, and it's
Mhm.
like okay, but then on the other side we have this like highly unregulated, very minimally regulated industry of wellness. We know it's a trillion with a T dollar industry that's selling these products to people.
Mhm.
Um, so in that way, yeah, I don't love detox, but personally, make me some juice. Yes, I will
I
drink
know.
juice
If
all
you
day
were
long.
like, let's go to the spa, let's go to the hot springs,
Oh,
I'm
to the
bringing
sun,
charcoal and oils.
yes,
I'd be there in a hot second if I
it's
didn't
fun.
have a
It's totally
1-year-old.
fun.
I think that do you guys know that saying like is an analogy like what kind of practitioner do you want to be? So if you go in the room and the faucet is overflowing, do you want to be the practitioner that grabs the mop and starts mopping up the water, or do you want to be the practitioner that goes and turns off the faucet, like if the sink is
Mm.
overflowing, right? And you want to be the one that goes and turns off the faucet because if you're just mopping things up, you're going to be there forever. And I think that is really poignant when it comes to detox and the power of trying to minimize exposures first. And that can get into like chemophobia for sure, where you just become super paranoid about all chemicals. But I also think there's just some really practical steps that are not very profitable that don't get looked at enough. And so, yeah, that's, I guess, one piece too is just like remembering that reducing exposures while not as, I think of going to parties. This has happened to me so many times where I go to a party and somebody's sitting there like drinking their beer and smoking a cigarette and asking me what my favorite detox supplement is. And I'm just like, oh,
Dude, that describes my friend group 1000%.
yeah.
Actually, as you were talking at one point, I was with the psychoneuroimmunology. I can't remember the whole how to say it. But in California, when I first moved there, had been primal diet, raw food for years, enemas, the whole thing. Ejuva cleanses. Do you guys remember Ejuva? They would like press the herbs into these tablets, and it was beautiful. There was like a lot of beauty. And then I remember moving to California, and I would literally wake up in the morning, and I would put my little, like ashtray on my chest and roll and light a cigarette in bed. Smoke the cigarette and like ash onto the ashtray on my chest. Meanwhile, I would be like buying whatever Essene bread, like literally from the store.
100%.
Yeah, it's interesting how humans are. And look, here's another thing that I think of. It's like when we do think about exposure and then the cost of detox, people who are the most exposed are the people, we know this, have the least amount of money, right? They're in the lowest socioeconomic bracket. That is obvious, like obviously in a capitalistic society, that is how it goes. But in Boston, just recently, we had a stat come out that was people that live in Back Bay, which is like a very well-off neighborhood in Boston, lived an average of 20 years longer than people who lived in Roxbury, which is not as well off. There's all kinds of reasons for that, but one of them absolutely is exposure. We see that over and over in epidemiological studies. So I think it's worthwhile to say that it's like the methods that are very practical and you can't market or make money off of need to be like everybody needs to be aware of those and supported to take those actions versus being marketed to with something else that costs money if you already don't have money.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Like
100%.
take your shoes off before you go in your house. That's a huge one. I don't know if you've seen some of the studies on that. Just like all the toxic chemicals that are in the breakdown products from tires that are like lo and behold in our bloodstream, just that you can reduce that majorly by just taking your shoes off before you go in your house or managing household dust and cleaning your
Vacuuming
water.
regularly.
Yes,
Yeah.
just drinking water.
Yes.
just drinking water or sweating, like kidneys and skin. It's like that's not possible all day, every day, but like it's not hard to drink enough water and to like sweat.
Yeah. Ooh, that's another great study I read on this, which is the difference between sitting still while sweating and exercise-induced sweat. You get way more mobilization of toxins through active sweating, which is cool.
It's fascinating.
I'm just thinking we should pause here and make this part 1 and then come back and finish part 2. Do you think that that's
Yeah. So I guess you could, I guess I don't know what you have an idea for second one, but like looking at some of these cleanses and then like looking at some of the plausibility or what evidence would support them and then what wouldn't might be cool.
Yeah, like going through our big ideas, which is, that's a huge one that I would like to cover.
Yes.
I think,
and I do want to cover some of like the practical takeaways for people, because I think that's so important with what you just said, is that these should be things that are accessible to every single person and not, hidden behind this paywall of like $500. I feel like from the ones you listed, $500 seems to be like the average price. Pay $500 and you can detox. And it's interesting to me that it seems like a lot of them, like you buy this kit or whatever that gets mailed to you to help support it. But then the whole basis of it, or the foundation, is that you're supposed to avoid alcohol, avoid smoking, avoid ultra processed foods, and maybe like drink so much water a day or something. And it's like, dude, if you just did those things, you probably don't need all of these extra like support herbs or whatever they're sending to you. And anybody can do that, for the most part, so.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important, like in part 2, to go into like eating fruits and vegetables, eating enough protein. It doesn't have to be in juice form. Drinking enough water, making sure you pee and poop.
Sulfur-based foods. Yeah, there's pretty straightforward ways to shift your diet so that all the micronutrients that can support those pathways to run are in place. And then if you want to, there's also some of those like botanicals that can help induce the expression of phase one and phase two enzymes
Right.
and also inhibit them, which is, I think, kind of it gets a little bit weird because like that. Have you guys seen that Hodgins and Minnick
Yeah.
article in a while
Mhm.
Yes.
where it's kind of like, God, you could look at you like it could get really confusing trying to trying to go through and select like what do I want to speed up phase one or slow it down? I mean, some breast cancers are associated with really fast phase one, so yeah, we could look more at phase one and phase two modulators and the idea that it's kind of like the immune system. Sometimes just like boosting the immune system isn't actually what you need.
Mm-hmm.
But
Exactly.
you need
Yeah.
modulation. There's different branches of the immune system. Same thing with these modulators of phase one and phase two.
Right. Like I think in there's very general things that anyone can do to just support their body's detox pathways every single day. But then when you get into that kind of stuff, if you're someone who has a very specific need, like
Mm-hmm.
you're exposed to, say, you're a hairdresser or a nail technician, and you're exposed to these VOCs and compounds that you're inhaling and you're feeling sick because of it, if you can't get out of that workplace, which I guess would be ideal, like maybe there's specific things that you need to be doing that somebody else who has a totally different situation wouldn't be doing
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
your phases need to be like balanced in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And then also, if you're constipated,
Right.
you need to fix that
You got to
first.
shit.
And that's like a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And not just for excretion, but for the way that your microbiome is influencing your detoxification in your colon and then potentially recycling those toxicants back up or that can just mess everything up. So, and a lot of people are constipated. That's very, very common.
I want to talk about IV therapy too next time.
Ooh, yes. I think this is going to end up being a two-part episode, and we'll have Amanda back to continue talking. This is a very large topic, and there's lots of areas to cover, and we want to do it justice. So we're going to continue with part two. And
Yeah, it'd also be cool if people comment either on Instagram or on Substack or email us if there are facets of this that you want us to speak to specifically. We have quite a list, but if there's questions that you have, let us know and maybe we can get to those in part two.
Sounds
So, yeah,
good.
we'll see you next time.
Bye.
thanks. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah, absolutely.